Phoenix, straining to carry the weight of my brain like a genius. Knowing I'm sowing seeds, let's see whose thumb is the greenest. If I said it, I mean it. I did it because I need it. Eat, sleep it, and bleed it. Write it down and then read it. Asphalt to the cement, your trash talk. Delete it, I blast off, then lay them out like a Tempur-Pedic. It's black thought. For certain I'ma win eventually. This unsung, underrated, underappreciated. The one them underachievers had underestimated. Finally graduated, I'm one of the most hated. Something that's so sacred, nobody gonna take it, face it. I keep doing it well, doing it signs assistance. It's do it yourself, doing it below the radar. We doing it stealth, doing it again for Philadelphia. Who else we gonna do it again?
Second, I just want to absolutely positively give another round of applause and thank you to Busboys and Poets. I want to give, absolutely indispensable, I want to give a big, big thank you to Teaching for Change. I want to, big thanks to the Sports Fan Coalition, which is sponsoring this event. Everybody should sign up with SFC tonight. And big thank you to Haymarket Books as well. There's someone at that over there named Amanda. We do book events throughout the city. If people want information, check that out. And I want to thank Dan Snyder. Oh, you're familiar with his work. Now, Dan Snyder is, of course, the owner of or should I say his, Washington Redskins. And he really did inspire this book because over the time I've lived in Washington, D.C., I've watched him take one of the most tight relationships between a fan base and a team in the United States and basically treat it the way a baby treats a diaper. And that made me want, and I have a lot of experience at the horror of what that looks like. And that is what really inspired me to write this book. Also, thank you, I guess, should also go to James Dolan. He is the owner of the New York Knicks. He made his money the old-fashioned way. He inherited it. His father is Charles Dolan, the founder of Cablevision. James Dolan was a ne'er-do-well who had, as he puts it, tons of youthful indiscretions. Of course, they lasted till he was 48. So that's true. Sounds like a former president we just had. Very similar. And James Dolan, I mean, my God, I just kept thinking this line from The Simpsons of what was once said to Homer, that in any other country you would have starved to death years ago. That's James Dolan. In any other family, he would have absolutely starved to death or at least be serving out a mandatory minimum somewhere. Instead, his version of parental boot camp is running his daddy's team, the New York Knicks, running it into the ground, the team I grew up loving. So I really want to thank James Dolan for inspiring me to write Bad Sports, how owners are ruining the games we love. Now, I don't want it to seem like I'm just here to demonize owners. All right, a little bit. There's a little demonization, a little bit. But that's because they have so much power and so little accountability. I mean, they have power over our culture and how it's shaped. It's not just about sports. They have power over our urban landscapes. They have power over what does and doesn't get funded through a particular city council or municipality. They have so much power, and yet I think largely from sports fans to citizens, we are so oblivious to who they are. And that has it really starts with a guy who just died, actually, just in time for the book release. A gentleman by the name of George Steinbrenner. Now, Steinbrenner, he once said, "I don't have heart attacks, I give them." He died of a heart attack, kind of ironic, but pretty classy of me making fun of that. But let's talk about who Steinbrenner was for a second, because Steinbrenner was, and we should talk about it, because I don't know if you've read some of the obituaries about George Steinbrenner, but they make him sound like the love child of Dorothy Day and Yoda. And that's not who he was at all. And he was somebody who was like a bridge between an old style of ownership, like this kind of very sort of patriarchal, I'm the big man in charge, where's my cigar, I look out for the little guy, a bridge from that to the new owner that we see today, the people who hold up our cities for funds and all the rest of it. Now, I sort of have some insight on who that old George Steinbrenner was, because I have a little story about it. Do people want to hear it? Yeah. Little story? Yeah. All right. Picture it. Mid-1980s, New York City. The hair is terrible. The food is terrific. The music is awesome. I was 12 years old. I would wear one of those Run DMC bowlers hats to school. It made me look like Pierce Brosnan in the Thomas Crown Affair, though. I didn't look very cool. And that was the mid-1980s. And in the 80s, this was before the internet, of course, hard to imagine. And now, of course, we have 1 million columnists, sports columnists. You find sports column all over the interweb. So you have all this access to every type of commentary you could possibly want. Back then, you had really two newspapers that people read in New York. And no, it wasn't the New York Times. You had the New York Post, you had the Daily News. Each paper had 4 columnists. They changed about as often as popes. And these guys had tons of power. And whether you loved them or whether you hated them, you read them. And the New York Post had a columnist named Dick Young. And I hated Dick Young. Dick Young was a bigot. He was a total racist. He was a reactionary. But you read Dick Young because, well, you like sports, and that's one of the only people talking about sports. Well, in the mid-'80s, Dick Young dies. And the New York Post announces that there's going to be an open funeral for him on the swank Upper East Side of Manhattan. And so it's a Saturday in the city. I'm living on the West Side with my mom, and, she was wherever. So I got in my bar mitzvah suit. That's true, actually. It was a size too big. It was bought for me for when I'd be 13, and then, therefore, a man. And I got on the crosstown bus and went to the funeral. And I figured I'd be going there. There'd be tons of fans there. It would be a whole scene. I just thought it would be cool to check out. And so I show up to Dick Young's funeral. I'm 12 years old. And I realized that I wasn't the only person who didn't like Dick Young. Like, there were no fans there at all. There was none of the general public there. I walked in. And who's there instead? But it's the who's who of the New York sports scene. All the famous TV commentators. Warner Wolf, people might know that name. The CBS sports guy was there. Let's go to the videotape. Lou Carnesecca, the coach of St. John's, was there, walking around, shaking hands. I mean, it was a who's who thing. I walked in there, and I fit in like Rand Paul at an NAACP meeting. I was like, what am I doing here? And everybody's staring at me and like, who is this? Literally, I was like, oh, what's on my nose? I was like so awkward and 12 and, And I'm just about to slink away when I feel this huge meaty palm on the back of my neck shake me like this. And I hear, here's the guy, now we can get this party started. Party, it was a funeral. And I look up, and it's George Steinbrenner. And the first thing I think is, holy crap, it's George Steinbrenner. And the second thing I think is, what the hell's wrong with his head? Like, he had this huge head. Like, Ted Kennedy had nothing on this guy. I mean, people talk about steroids. I don't know what he was taking. He looked like a Charms lollipop. His head was so big. And I was just like, wow, he's got a big head, and he's shaking my neck. And then he pushes me inside the funeral home and then just turns around and laughs and walks away. And, this is Park Avenue. So at that point, people start coming up to me, and they're like, and who are you? And I'm like, well, I'm the guy who just got harassed by George Steinbrenner. And then I sat down, was part of the service, and left. And it was this experience where, he was kind of trying to show a little mercy to me, to the awkward kid who was there at the funeral. And that is part of who he was. I only tell that story because it's evocative of other stories that people tell about him. But there was another George Steinbrenner as well, of course, the bridge to owners of the future.